Well, the government's Ensuring Integrity Bill failed to pass the Senate at the end of the last sitting year after Pauline Hanson walked away from her promise to support the reforms. We're now well into the new year. There's talk the legislation's coming back, but you've just heard the latest about the behaviour of the CFMEU. Is this legislation coming back? You've got to wonder, or has the coalition given up on industrial reform? Let's ask my economics panel. Right, well, joining me now for their take on the key economic issues around today, former Chief Economist to the Prime Minister, Dr Andrew Stone, along with the Herald Sun's business columnist and very beautifully attired tonight, Mr Terry McCrann. I told him I wanted him to wear a bit of colour and he's certainly done that. Andrew Stone, I want to go to an article by Janet Albrechtson in The Australian today. She accuses the Morrison government of losing its nerve on industrial relations. Now, is that tough or is it fair?
Actually, I'm not sure it is entirely fair, or at least to Scott Morrison. I think the article in question, we underestimate how much damage has been done by the knocking off of Kevin Rudd as Prime Minister and then as Tony Abbott as Prime Minister, first-term Prime Minister. It's just very difficult now on a contentious subject like industrial relations reform for a Prime Minister to say, well, I will use my capital here. Now, there are some things you can do, and hopefully the Integrity Bill will be reintroduced and passed. But the difficulty that a Prime Minister faces if they wish to pursue industrial relations reform. First of all, it's actually not a very propitious time. At the moment, wages growth is very weak. When the Howard government pursued this in the mid-2000s, at least they had wages growing very strongly, unemployment rate down around 4%, wages growing at 4% plus a year. Now they're growing at about 2% a year, or a little over. So it's not a very propitious time to be trying this. It's difficult for for a Prime Minister to muster the political capital to pursue a difficult reform. And also the trouble is, at least back in the 2000s, in the 1990s, you also had a business community that was prepared to actually vigorously try to pursue the reform, the debate, and support a government trying to make reforms. At the moment, unfortunately, at least for big business, I think there's no confidence on the part of the government at all that they won't abandon the field at the first sign of any difficulty.
Well, that's a real worry, Andrew. You're absolutely right. I mean, Terry, you could be in a fight with the unions and certainly the Labor Party, and we know that the government would be pitching for a fourth term, and that's hard enough in itself. You look behind yourself and there's nobody there. You know, they're happy to get out there and talk about climate change and diversity programs and everything else, but has business itself lost the ticker for reform? Terry McCrann.
Oh, sorry. I was just thinking about Andrew's reference to the Prime Minister's capital, and I don't know that he's got a lot of political capital coming into this coronavirus issue. And he's going to lose a little more when they have to announce in big red letters that the budget surplus has disappeared. Mm-hmm. I think I see it in terms of this very big basket with a label on the front called "Too Hard."
You're right.
And that's joined a whole lot of things in that basket, IR reform. I think the big question in this context is going to be, will the world let us forget about IR reform? And both in terms of what's happening in the wake of the coronavirus, but more generally the very soggy wages growth we're getting. Why are we getting soggy wages growth? Because we're not allowing businesses to develop the productivity and to do the deals with their workers which can actually pay for higher wages. So the whole thing is a very unattractive mess. And we're going to come out of 2020 with pretty blunt choice. Do we want to keep going down this path of not reforming anything, and that's both government, business, and the workers, and in labour, or are we going to embrace something that can actually develop rising wages and jobs?
So this is a real challenge, Andrew Stone. I mean, you've written a book, I know, with lots of ideas, some of them thought-provoking and a bit crazy brave, and other of them I think that we need to have a conversation about. But we're used to the two political parties go out there with a platform, argue the case, and then when governments were in power, they would use the power. You get the sense in recent times, I know that you're talking about that very tough decade of changing prime ministers, but you get the sense that political parties exist just to survive, that everything they do is about surviving in office rather than delivering reform in office. Now, I have to say, Labor come in and they don't waste time. Look at Daniel Andrews. He's on this big cultural fight in Victoria. Not so the coalition. So this is the are we as Australians, do we lack voter appetite for political leaders to make big changes?
Well, actually, I don't really blame the Australian people here. I think it is more the internal dynamics of the political parties in question. So the Labor Party lost their nerve with Kevin Rudd. There were many other factors at play there. But then the Abbott government did actually try to do some big things, and unfortunately then discovered that internally, I think there's every reason to believe that they would have actually succeeded, in my view, at the 2016 election. But their own backbenchers and MPs decided not to have a try with the reform program that the Abbott government was trying to pursue, and so it's unsurprising that we've had a very cautious program since then. My take is that the Australian people are still prepared to support reform as long as it's well argued, and as long as there is trust in the institutions, in particular the federal government. And how you re-establish that is to try, as I argue in my book, is to try to develop a number of, there are some significant productivity advancing reforms that we could do that are politically achievable, in particular in relation to higher education reform and also in relation to energy market reform, where people would see real dividends, especially if we were to improve our energy markets. They'd see real dividends in terms of much lower prices for businesses and for consumers, and that will create the sense of trust then if the government wishes to do more difficult reforms such as industrial relations reform.